When people think of 1970s glam rock, one band instantly comes to mind: Slade. They were loud, flamboyant, and unforgettable, a group that gave the world some of the most anthemic songs of the decade. And at the very heart of it all was Noddy Holder, the unmistakable frontman with a powerful voice that could shake arenas. With his sideburns, top hats, and larger-than-life personality, Noddy defined not just a band but an entire era of British rock. Now at 79, Noddy Holder is remembered as a legend. But the truth about where his journey has led him is nothing short of heartbreaking. For fans who grew up chanting "Come on, feel the noise" or celebrating every Christmas with "Merry Xmas, everybody," the story of what became of Noddy is a reminder that fame, no matter how bright, cannot shield anyone from the difficulties of life. So how did one of rock's most recognizable figures, a man who once seemed invincible on stage, end up in such a fragile and tragic state? Let's take a journey through Noddy Holder's rise, his dominance with Slade, his personal challenges, and the struggles that have left fans devastated in his later years. The rise of Slade. Noddy Holder was born Neville John Holder in Walsall, England, in 1946. Growing up in the post-war years, music became his escape. From an early age, Noddy was fascinated by rock and roll. He picked up the guitar and immersed himself in the sounds of Elvis Presley, Little Richard, and Chuck Berry. In the 1960s, he began performing with local groups, gradually making a name for himself as a singer with both grit and range. But it wasn't until he joined forces with guitarist Dave Hill, bassist Jim Lee, and drummer Don Powell that magic truly happened. Together, they became Slade, a band that would dominate the charts and the airwaves in Britain. Slade's sound was hard-hitting yet catchy, their look bold and outrageous. They embodied glam rock with glittering outfits, platform boots, and wild hairstyles. But beyond the theatrics, their songs connected with people. Hits like "Mama We're All Crazy Now," "Goodbye T. Jane," and "Come On, Feel the Noise" became anthems for an entire generation. And at the center of it all was Noddy Holder, his raspy, booming voice giving the band a unique edge. When Noddy belted out a chorus, it was impossible not to sing along. He wasn't just the frontman. He was the energy, the humor, the fire that kept Slade alive, the peak of fame. In the early 1970s, Slade was unstoppable. They scored 17 consecutive top 20 hits in the UK and sold millions of records worldwide. They were not just chart toppers, they were cultural icons. Their concerts were legendary, packed with screaming fans who felt like they were part of something bigger than music. Noddy's voice became one of the most recognizable sounds in rock. Unlike many singers of the era, he had a vocal power that could cut through walls of guitars and still sound effortless. Critics compared his ability to raw force of nature. Slade's influence spread far beyond their own time. Bands like Kiss, Def Leppard, Oasis, and Quiet Riot would later cite Slade as a major inspiration. In fact, Quiet Riot's cover of "Come On, Feel the Noise" became a massive hit in America, introducing a new generation to Noddy's unforgettable delivery. But even in the middle of fame and success, cracks were beginning to form. Fame is never simple, and for Noddy Holder, the pressures of being a rock star would eventually take their toll. The demands of stardom. Behind the scenes, Slade faced their share of challenges. Endless tours, constant media attention, and the pressure to keep producing hits weighed heavily on the band. The rock and roll lifestyle, with its late nights and heavy partying, began to take a toll on their health and relationships. For Noddy, the constant strain on his voice was especially brutal. His powerhouse vocals, though iconic, were also punishing. Night after night of screaming through choruses left him with lasting damage. Doctors warned him that his vocal cords were suffering from years of abuse. But stepping back was not an option in the height of fame. Then came the changes in music. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, punk, new wave, and other genres pushed glam rock out of the spotlight. Slade's popularity waned, though they experienced a resurgence in the early 1980s, especially after a famous appearance at the Reading Festival. The golden days were over. For a man like Noddy, who had built his life around the adrenaline of performing, the decline was devastating. Life after Slade. By the 1990s, Noddy Holder made a decision that shocked fans. He left Slade. After decades of touring and recording, he stepped away from the band he had helped build from the ground up. His voice was worn, his energy drained, and he wanted to explore life outside of the punishing demands of rock stardom. In the years that followed, Noddy reinvented himself. He became a beloved media personality in the UK, working as a radio DJ, appearing on television, and even acting in sitcoms. He embraced his role as a cultural figure, always with humor and warmth. People loved hearing his distinctive voice and his laugh, which carried the same energy that once filled stadiums. Every Christmas, his voice echoed across the UK as Merry Xmas everybody returned to the charts. The song, released in 1973, became a holiday classic, and its royalties alone made sure that Noddy remained financially comfortable. On the surface, it seemed like Noddy had transitioned well into a quieter, more relaxed life. But behind the smiles, a darker reality was unfolding. Health struggles. In 2018, Noddy Holder faced one of the biggest battles of his life. He was diagnosed with throat cancer. The man whose voice had carried Slade to fame, whose booming shouts had defined an era, now faced the possibility of losing that voice forever. Doctors gave him just 6 months to live. For Noddy, who had always been larger than life, the diagnosis was devastating. But in true rock and roll spirit, he fought back. He underwent experimental treatments, battled through pain and uncertainty, and refused to give up. Miraculously, Noddy survived. Against the odds, he lived well beyond the doctor's grim prognosis. He kept his struggle private for years, not wanting to overshadow his legacy with pity. But when news of his battle eventually came out, fans were stunned. This revelation was heartbreaking for many. To think that the man who once seemed indestructible, whose voice had roared through decades, had been reduced to fighting for his life in silence. It was almost too much to bear. The toll of time. Today, at 79 years old, Noddy Holder's life looks very different from the days of Slade's glory. His voice is not what it once was. The powerful roar that defined Come On Feel the Noize has been softened by age and illness. Public appearances are rare, and when they happen, fans see a man who carries the weight of his battles. It is not that Noddy has lost his spirit. Those who know him say he still has his humor, his warmth, and his determination. But the contrast between the wild rock star of the 1970s and the frail man of today is difficult for fans to process. To see their hero weakened by cancer and age is a reminder that time catches up with even the strongest voices. The heartbreaking ending. For many, the most heartbreaking part of Noddy Holder's story is not just his illness, but the sense of what was lost. Here was a man with one of the greatest voices in rock, now silenced by the very disease that attacked his gift. Here was a man who once commanded crowds of thousands, now living quietly, away from the stage. Fans mourn not just for Noddy's suffering, but for the reminder that their own youth, their own golden days, are gone too. Noddy Holder was the soundtrack to countless lives, weddings, parties, nights out, and Christmas mornings. Seeing him fragile feels like losing a part of that history. Yet, even in this heartbreak, there is something inspiring. Noddy has shown resilience, humor, and courage in the face of unimaginable challenges. His survival itself is a victory, even if his body bears the scars of the fight. Legacy that lives on. Despite the sadness of his later years, Noddy Holder's legacy is untouchable. He is one of the most iconic frontmen in British rock history. His songs continue to be played, his influence continues to be felt, and his voice remains immortalized in recordings that will never fade. You cannot walk through a British shopping center at Christmas without hearing Merry Xmas everybody. You cannot talk about glam rock without mentioning Slade. And you cannot talk about Slade without remembering Noddy Holder's shout of, "It's Christmas!" A sound that has outlived trends, generations, and even the man's own health. For all the heartbreak, there is pride. Noddy Holder gave the world something it will never forget. At 79, Noddy Holder's journey is bittersweet. From a working-class boy in Walsall to the king of glam rock, he lived a life most could only dream of. He reached the top, he inspired generations, and he became part of the cultural fabric of Britain. But life after fame brought battles no stage could prepare him for: illness, decline, and the weight of time itself. His story is heartbreaking, yes, but it is also deeply human. It reminds us that behind the glitter and noise, rock stars are mortal too. They feel pain, they face sickness, and they grow old just like the rest of us. For fans, the best way to honor Noddy Holder is not to dwell on what he has lost, but to celebrate what he gave. The music, the joy, the memories, they remain. Every time his songs play, every time a crowd sings along to Come On Feel the Noise, Noddy lives on. And that is the beauty of music. Even when the voice is gone, the sound never dies.